everyone. Thanks for tuning in. So this is my second time doing a vertical live. I'm super excited about that. Hopefully this is coming across as a vertical live. Looks like it is. So thank you for tuning in. Trying to read the messages here. Okay, so yeah, so thank you for tuning in. Today we're gonna talk about butternut squash. We're gonna make a recipe. I'm gonna talk to you about how to buy a butternut squash, how to store it, some tips and tricks for it. Also, some tips and tricks for the ingredients that we're using in the recipe, which is a really simple recipe. It's just a caramelized butternut squash. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and prep this for the recipe, and then once it's baking, then we'll get to talking about the tips. So let me go ahead and set my oven. So I'm gonna set my oven. So for this particular recipe, I'm setting it for 400 degrees. I'll go ahead and warm up. So what we're going to do is we're going to prep this for peeling. So, butternut squash has a really thick rind. So a lot of times people have difficulty peeling it. And, as you're kind of peeling it, it is a little tough, right? The skin there is a little tough to peel off. So there's a few things you can do in order to make that easier. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to trim off the ends of our squash. So go ahead and hopefully you guys can kind of see that. Let me know. I know it's in the bottom part of the screen, at least for me. Is that too hard to see? I can move the camera. Here, let me move the camera actually. Pardon me, this is a little clunky. I have this little bendable tripod thing and it kind of works. So we have our butternut squash. Hopefully that's easier to see. I'm going to go ahead and trim off the ends. And also, I'll show you another trick here too. If it's hard for you to push through the butternut squash, here's a tip. I don't know if you can hear that. My cat has the zoomies right now, so she's running back and forth. Here's a tip for cutting through a butternut squash. So if pushing through it is difficult for you, once you get the knife in there, just rock it back and forth while you're doing it. That'll help push the knife through. Just keep rocking it back and forth as you're pushing it. As you can see, the knife is now pretty full way through. So you can kind of just do that also as a way to cut off the ends. So we have our butternut squash. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this squash and I'm going to pierce the peel with a knife. So the reason I'm doing this, we're going to pop it in the microwave. That's what's going to make this easier to peel. So we're going to pop it in the microwave for about 3 minutes. So by piercing the skin, a couple things are going to happen when it's in the microwave. So it's going to, one, soften the skin just in general. The skin's going to soften. Secondly, the steam from the flesh, as it kind of cooks a little bit, is going to help loosen the skin from the meat of the butternut squash. So it just makes it easier to peel. So I'm just going to take my knife and just around the butternut squash. You can do this with a fork too. Just, make some little jabs to help with the butternut squash when it's in the microwave. Okay, almost all the way through. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the microwave for 3 minutes. I'm going to let this cook for 3 minutes. That's going to help make this a lot easier to peel. So give me 1 sec here. Put this in the microwave. And then we're going to make that. Okay, so let me turn my camera a little bit up higher now so I can kind of see y'all. Okay, so I'd love to know, so for those of you that are tuning in, I just want to say one thing first. One of the easiest ways that you can help support a creator, so me as a YouTube person, is to give a video that you're watching a thumbs up. So if you are enjoying this so far, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. It really does make a big difference on how our content performs. So, content that's liked, content that's watched really does help. So just if you want to have a really easy way to be like, hey, you know what? throw a thumbs up. So that's microwaving for 3 minutes. And then for those of you that are tuning in, I would love to know, like, what are some of your favorite butternut squash recipes? Do you like it as a soup, sauteed, everything? Tell me some of the best butternut squash recipes that you actually have had. I would love to know that. The one that we're making today, we're going to make a cheater caramelized butternut squash, and this one is, super simple. It only has 4 ingredients. You can kind of make it and bake it, and it's a great side dish for all of your holiday treats. So I highly recommend it. Okay, so I'm just going to check in here. So we got. Okay. Sorry, I have my notes here on my iPad because we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff today. So so let's talk about. Tell me what your favorite butternut squash recipes are. I would really, really, really love to know. Like I said, right now what we're doing is we're microwaving the butternut squash. That's going to make it easier to peel. So what happens what we did to prep it is we cut off the ends, cut off both sides, pierced the skin with a knife. You can also use a fork, and then you're going to microwave it for about 3 minutes. And the 3 minutes that it's in there, what's happening is that skin is softening. So that skin is really tough, right? So the skin is softening, and then the flesh that does cook steams and helps remove the skin from the flesh. So it just makes it a little bit easier to peel, because these things are difficult to peel. And you know what, when you're peeling it, there's really no, you can kind of do whatever's easiest for you. I like one of these little, just kind of old school peelers. Some people use one of the other ones that they can just drag all the way down. Do the thing that you want. Use the one that you like, but I would love to know, tell me what your favorite butternut squash recipes are. Let's see how much time we have here. It's almost done cooking. So once it's done cooking, it has to cool. So that also takes a little bit of time. So you might as well talk to me while we're here, because we got a few minutes before I can actually fully peel this thing. Okay, it's done. I'm going to grab it out of the microwave. Okay, so I want to show you this. You can see, look really closely, you can see the beads of water that formed. That's where I stabbed it with the knife. So those beads of water are moisture, hence the steam, coming out of the butternut squash. And that's what actually makes it easier to peel when you do this. So you can do, I don't know if you guys can see that not in the reflection. See that, if you can see those pretty decently. But that is basically, here, let me get another grip on it. It's really hot. If you can see that little, see the bead right there? Right there. See those beads? Yeah, so that's the steam coming out of the butternut squash. So I'm just gonna let it cool so I can get to peeling it. But basically, here's the thing about the skin. You can actually eat the skin. It's actually edible. Oh, I have a comment here. Okay, you saw the beads. Yay, thank you for letting me know. So you can actually eat the skin. It's completely edible. It just sort of depends. I would say it depends on what you're going to be doing with your butternut squash. So if I'm going to be pureeing a butternut squash to make a soup, I recommend just eating the skin. The skin is high in fiber. It's nutrient dense, just like butternut squash. So also it fights food waste, right? We throw out 40% of the food that we grow in America. It's a huge contributor to climate change. Food waste accounts for 8% of climate change greenhouse gases. So if you can not throw stuff out, I highly recommend it. So, if you're going to be making a butternut squash soup, try eating the skin. Just leave it on. You can roast it in the oven. When it's done roasting, throw it in the blender with everything that you're going to be pureeing it with, and there you go. Fight food waste. So it's still pretty hot, but I think I can probably start peeling it. I'm going to try. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so hopefully you can see here. Let me move back. Just gonna, yeah, you can see how much easier that peel is coming off. Yeah, So the recipe that we're doing, we're not going to be pureeing it, so therefore I'm not going to leave the skin on. But something I will do with these kind of peels, I'll save them and freeze them, and I use this kind of stuff to make my homemade veggie broth. So you don't have to completely throw it away either. So another thing I want to talk to you about, I'm going to show you this really quick while I'm peeling this. This is the reason I wanted to peel it. I kind of was debating. I was like, do I spend a lot of time prepping this thing before we even get to baking it, or do I actually just like jump right into it? But I wanted to show you, like, when you have the butternut squash, when you're peeling it, you're going to see, let's see here, you're going to see like this kind of lighter flesh that has green ribs down the side of it. That's a tougher part of the flesh. It's not quite the peel, but it's a tougher part of the flesh. Remove that too. When you're peeling it, you want to remove all of that. All of that stuff, like if you want a nice, creamy, just really like elegant butternut squash, however, whatever recipe that you're using, you want to make sure you remove all of that stuff. So you get into that nice, see how it's like skin, kind of light yellow, orange. You want to get to the orange. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and peel this. It's still very, very, very hot. Usually I let it cool, but in the interest of time, I'm just gonna power through it. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, it's coming off. Feel free to ask me any questions. Okay, let's see. Trying to read. It's so hard to read on this small screen on the read the comments. I wonder if I can bring it up. I'm gonna try to bring up this video on my iPad also, so I can check back on comments because it's so tiny to see. Give me 1 second here. Just trying to pull it up here. I don't know if this is going to work, but I feel like I want to be able to respond to whatever it is that you're asking. So, oh. Let me turn off the volume part. Okay. There we go. Now I can see. Okay. I can see the comments much better this way. So I will go over there and check every now and then and see and to respond to stuff. Okay, so weak hands and struggle to cut raw butternut squash at all. So I'm glad you, yeah. So yeah, if you have weak hands and like you mentioned, the person that mentioned that, Mary, thank you for mentioning that. Basically, the rocking method is really easy to like work your way through that butternut squash with a knife. Like you don't have to use as much pressure. And if you also are in that scenario, like I think, when you're making a recipe with it, do a puree recipe because then you can leave the skin on. Like after you roast it, you don't have to take the skin off, which I think is, very, very, very nice. So, okay. It's still very, very hot. It's kind of burning my hands through the cloth, but you guys are worth it. Okay, I got to see some other comments here. Let's see. Hey, so I haven't popped in 11 days. Any information you can give me on regarding that? I don't know what that is. So, yeah, sorry. Okay. Just peeling this through. Hopefully you guys can kind of see that. It looks like, now I can see in the other, on my iPad, that you guys can actually see what I'm doing too, which is nice. It's hard to tell in this creator view a little bit as what's exactly on the screen. So I'm just going to keep peeling this off, and then we're going to prep the butternut squash. We're going to be making this caramelized butternut squash recipe, and and then I'm going to go over everything with it as far as like how to buy it, how to store it, all that stuff as soon as I get it peeled. Try peeling it while it's hot is a little difficult, but here we are, right? So I appreciate you guys tuning in. For those of you that are watching again, like, you know, if you want it like a really great way to help out creators, I love doing this. If you want to help out creators, just hitting that thumbs up button is an easy way to, you know, let the robots know that you like what you're watching and that you like this content. Okay, get this peeled. It's really hot. But as you can see again, so like I mentioned, you're going to get this layer. You see how much it's steaming? So yeah, it's a little hot to grab right now. I don't know if you can see that. But you get this layer of lighter yellow that has these green ribbons down the side. You want to remove all that. That's going to be a tougher part of the squash. And therefore, whatever you're making is going to be not as creamy, not as flavorful. So really, you can kind of see it better right there, maybe. See those ribbons down the side? You want to make sure to remove all that stuff. So we're going to take all of that off. We're almost done. Or I'm almost done. It's just really steaming and hot. I didn't think about that part too much, I guess. But we almost got it done here. Okay. There we go. It's pretty much peeled. Okay. Let me just check here, see if there's any skin. Got some parts in the middle here to still. This peeler is it's getting a workout. Okay. So we have our peeled, finally, we have our peeled butternut squash. So let me just, found some more green ribbons. Let me just take those off really quick. Do as I say, right? Okay, get all those green ribbons off. Okay, so we have our peeled butternut squash. But as I pointed out, you can eat the skin. So food waste, huge contributor to climate change. Food waste is 8% of greenhouse gases, so huge contributor. And we throw out 40% of the food that we grow here. So if you can find ways to eat everything, and I see there's some comments in there, if you can find ways to eat everything, it really does make an impact. And so with butternut squash, if you're making a recipe where you're gonna, like, you know, be doing a puree soup, leave the skin on when you roast it. Honestly, there's fiber in there, there's nutrients in there, it's completely edible. There's no reason to throw it out if you don't have to throw it out. So let me just clear my board here. We're gonna go ahead and cut this baby up. Okay, so I mentioned earlier, this doesn't apply now as much because I've now already peeled it and steamed it, but if you're cutting through a butternut squash and you find it difficult to cut through a butternut squash, when you're in it, you can roll it, and that will give you won't have to use as much effort. You just can, like, roll it to slowly get through it and then kind of finish that off. Okay. Got our butternut squash here, just cutting that up. We're gonna scoop out the seeds. Also, the seeds are completely edible too. So just like a pumpkin, you can roast the seeds. So if I'm making like a butternut squash recipe, you can roast those seeds and put them on top of the soup. It makes a really great garnish. We got some comments here. Okay, so let's see here. What? Okay, I don't know what. Okay, so I'm cutting out the little seed well here. So when I'm shopping for a butternut squash, I will look for one that kind of has more of like it doesn't have as much of a bulb on the end. Doesn't have too much of this on there. I just wanted to show you. If this part is thicker, that means you're gonna have more meat to the butternut squash. So just something to know. Let me grab a spoon. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna grab a spoon to scoop out the seeds. Okay. So let me go ahead and scoop those out. Oops. It's a little slippery because it's fresh squash. And get these out. I just want to show you how to prepare this. I think it's one of those vegetables that kind of stresses people out. Like, and it's, you know, I think the stress is earned. It's a little bit of a difficult, you know, thing to deal with. So go ahead and get those in there. Got that peeled. Just got a little bit on this side. Get that out. Then get this one done, and we're going to chop this up, and then we're going to make our recipe. We're making this lovely caramelized butternut squash. It's a cheater recipe, only like 4 ingredients, one being the butternut squash, so like not a lot of ingredients, but honestly, like so delicious. Just a nice side dish. So if you're a butternut squash lover, I highly recommend it. Okay, get our seeds here. Our peels over here. I'm just gonna clean up my station for a second, so give me a moment here. Guys, got any questions? Oh, I was gonna tell you, so next week, or next live stream, I'll let you know when that's gonna be. I'm planning it either end of this week or next or whatever, but I'm gonna dig into parchment paper, wax paper, the difference between those things. Let me see what's on the agenda here. Give me a second here. Switch over. Yeah, so next week we're going to be talking parchment paper, the difference between parchment paper and wax paper, which is really, really big, so you should definitely know that. And I got a really fun smoothie recipe I think that you guys are going to really like, so stay tuned for that. Okay, so we got our seeds out. And you're going to get a little bit of a parchment paper hack trick in this video too, so I appreciate you tuning in. I do appreciate you guys watching. It really, really means a lot to me. Okay. So this recipe is actually on my YouTube channel and on my blog, and I will put a link to a lot of the topics that we're covering here. From, I'm going to show you how to buy a butternut squash, how to peel a butternut squash. I just showed you how to store it. I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to talk to you about the difference between light and brown sugar, all these things. I'm going to put the links in the show notes to those pieces that already have videos out there, just so you can get to them. So, okay, so we're going to chop our butternut squash here. Let's go ahead. The main thing you want to do here is you want to kind of cut it into reasonably same size pieces. So the reason for that is so that way when we bake it, it bakes evenly. So I'm just gonna cut these so they're about similar thickness. So you kind of see here what I'm basically trying to do here is I'm just trying to have a similar thickness, so that way when I cut it into cubes, they're all about the same. That just helps it when it's baking, so you get a nice even bake on all of the butternut squash. My heater just came on and it's like blasting on me, and I'm roasting. I run warm. I don't know are you guys people that run warm or run cold? I run warm, so like if it's above 64 degrees, I'm dying. So I'm gonna step away for a second and turn down my thermostat, or turn it up, or whatever. I don't know which one it is. Is it turn down or turn up? I'm gonna make it so it's not so hot. Give me 1 second. Okay, I got the heater on, and then like the oven is on, which is like this bidet of heat coming up at me. So it's like really warm in here right here. Okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and make our butternut squash cubes so they're about even in size. Don't want to, there we go. That's what I was trying to avoid. Okay, so we're cutting it up into cubes. And we're going to put this on a baking sheet in an even layer. So let me get that kind of going. And let me show you my trick here for parchment paper. Okay. Does anyone know the difference between parchment paper and wax paper? Anyone? They want to like drop a comment and say what the difference is between the two. Let me get this prepared. Okay, so wax paper. Wax paper is coated. Wax paper is treated a few different ways, and it's treated to make it stronger and make it more heat resistant. But then it's also given a silicone coating, and that silicone coating is what makes it non-stick. So wax paper, you can totally put in the oven. Or sorry, parchment paper. I mean parchment paper. If I've been saying wax paper, I mean parchment paper. Oh, wait. Yes. So wax paper, you cannot put in the oven. Wax paper is just a fine tissue that's been coated in a thin wax. Either like paraffin or a soybean-based wax. I highly recommend getting the soybean-based ones because they don't, toxins. But parchment paper, yeah, so it's been treated to make it tougher and heat resistant, and then also treated with silicone to make it non-stick. Perfect for the oven. Wax paper, not good for the oven. Will melt, will make the smoke alarm go off. You don't want to do that. So here's a little trick though, because like if you ever put, your wax paper on, you can see it doesn't really like, here, let me just show you. So I'm going to take off the sheet of wax paper. Okay. If I lay that on my pan, it doesn't really stay down and fit the pan. So here's what you can do in order to make your parchment paper, I keep saying wax paper, I feel like. You make your parchment paper pliable. Just crumble it up like you're gonna throw it away, and then uncrumble it. Just like that. And then you can put it on your baking pan, and it holds its shape. See that nice ridge there? Like it's holding its shape? It's holding its shape from that crumbling. So the crumbling will keep it in shape. Real easy way to, I got some comments here. Okay, let me see here. Parchment. That's correct. I didn't know about the, yep, it has silicone. Parchment paper can be compostable. So it's not recyclable at all. The silicone makes it completely not recyclable. But some parchment papers actually can be compostable. Let's see here. Some people. Yeah, I don't know if soybean-based wax causes the same sort of allergic reaction, but maybe it does. I'm not sure. That's a good question. Okay, so I'm going to start getting our cubes over here onto my baking sheet as I chop them up. Also, again, I just want to mention, you know what? Throw me a thumbs up if you're finding this video helpful or fun, or both, hopefully. Okay, so we're going to keep chopping up the butternut squash. Again, we're going for even, consistent slices, or cubes, I mean. Got that there. I'm just... I think I did it the wrong way last time. that was much easier. Okay. Get our cubes on the baking sheet. The goal here is just to have a fairly even layer with the butternut squash. I'll show you what that means as soon as I get everything on the baking sheet, but you don't want to have, you want to use a pan that's large enough where you get a decent even layer. You don't want to have it piling up. What I mean by that is you want something more like this and not like that. So nice even layer on the butternut squash. They can be rather close together. You just want them to be not stacked on each other. Okay, so I'm going to chop up the rest of the butternut squash. These are slippery, so I'm just going to do a few at a time. Yeah, they're really sliding all over the place. Just checking in on the comments here. I do appreciate you guys commenting in and watching and all that stuff. Okay, getting our cubes cut here. Like I said, so I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk to you about how to buy a butternut squash, what to look for, so you pick out the absolute perfect butternut squash. Because, you know, these things are not inexpensive, right? They're usually, you know, on a, like this one here is a couple pounds, and, you know, butternut squash can run, you know, $1.50-ish or so, maybe a pound. Depends, you know. So you want to make sure that you pick out a good one. You want it to be ripe. You want it to be flavorful. So I'm going to give you all of those tricks. Just as soon as I get this finished chopped up, on the baking sheet. I was going to do the recipe at the end, but it has to bake for like 40 minutes. So I want to like talk to you guys during that 40 minutes. So, you know, okay. So we have our butternut squash on the baking sheet. I'm going to melt a little bit of butter. Go ahead and melt that. Almost there. So we're gonna add brown sugar and butter and a little bit of salt, and then we're gonna bake it for about 40 minutes till it's nice and tender. Just tossing it a few times during that, and we'll have this lovely roasted and caramelized butternut squash that is like so delicious. It's so tasty. If you're looking for a very simple, I mean, you can buy butternut squash pre-cubed, right? So you can also buy it frozen. Like, there's ways to buy it so you don't have to do the part that I just did. I just wanted to show you. The thing about that, if you buy something that's prepped, if it's pre-cut, like the stuff you buy in the store, typically. So the frozen stuff is usually is processed not too far from where it's grown, typically. But if you're buying it at your local grocery store, the more it sits out, the more it's cut. Like, you know, that's more it sits out, more it's cut like that, it's going to lose that nutrients, lose that water, that sort of thing. So what we're going to do, let me get a spatula here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take, I've done this a few different ways. I always try a new way every time I make this thing, and I haven't really found a way that I like the best. So I kind of like them all the same. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cover our butternut squash in that melted butter. So just go ahead and like add the melted butter to the butternut squash, and then I'm going to just flip that around a little bit to get everything nicely coated. I have the video playing to the side here so I can see the comments, and it's weird, like I keep catching myself in a delayed reaction. It's like looking into the past. Okay. So got that nice and coated. Again, spreading it out into an even layer. Get everything on there. There's a few that jumped off. Little runaways. Next thing we're going to add is some brown sugar. But I want to show you this before I use it because I scooped out both. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this while this is baking. But here we have light brown sugar and dark brown sugar. And I'm going to explain to you how they make brown sugar and how these two are different. So that's going to be coming up. So stay tuned for that. But for this particular recipe, we're adding in brown sugar. So I'm just going to add in the brown sugar on here, and then I'm going to mix it all in again. Okay. You're going to turn this a few times while it's baking. So, but you know, try to get it as coated as you possibly can to begin with. Because of the technology here where I'm trying to live stream, I would typically use my hands to mix this, but I don't want to get my hands all buttery and greasy because I also have to touch my iPad and my phone. But you can get it pretty covered with the spatula. So I'm going to get it pretty covered. Okay. Are you excited about that? How's that looking? Are you excited? Come on. Give me something here, right? Okay, I see there's some comments on me to follow up. Let me put this in the oven. So I'm putting this in the oven at 400 degrees for 40 minutes. Okay, so that's going in. I'll check on it in 20, so let me set my watch here. Because I'll forget because I'm talking to you guys, and actually I'll do 15. Check on it in 15. Okay, I got a comment. Let me check on the comment here. Let's see. Making. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. I really do. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about, we got this baking. Let me talk to you about how to buy a butternut squash, because I feel like if you don't buy a good one, you already sent yourself up to fail, right? Like, and it might not be your fault. Like, you might not know how to buy a butternut squash. It's like, these are kind of tricky. And so, here's how you buy a butternut squash. The first thing you want to do is you want one that the size of it doesn't matter. It could be smaller, it can be bigger. I say this with, try to say this with a straight face, but size really does not matter. The size of it does not matter. Now, however, the shape can matter. So if you have trouble, you're going to have to peel this, right? You're going to have to run the peeler over it if you're using it like I'm using it now, if you're not roasting it. So if you're going to have to run the peeler over it, you might want a size that you can kind of grip onto. And that's, I think just reasonable, right? It's going to be a little easier to work with if you have big hands. So my hands are big, but you want one that you can like grip onto. The other thing that you want is you want a butternut squash that's heavy for its weight. And I feel like that's a really confusing thing to tell people, because if you're like, hey, I don't know how to buy a butternut squash, and now you're telling me to pick one that's heavy for its weight, how am I supposed to know what the hell that is? So here's how you tell. When you're at the store, grab a handful of them that are about the same size, same shape. Just grab a few of them that look similar, and then just kind of, lightly, don't fully grasp them, just kind of like rest them in your palm and just compare them to each other. And the one that's heavier, pick that one. Then take the next one and choose the one that's heavier and take that one. So when you find one that is heavy for its size, so you want it to be heavy for its size. The reason for that is how things grow, right? How do we grow things? We give them water and nutrients. So as they grow, they get more water in them. And that water is what gives its weight and gives it flavor, right? So, and here's the thing, you can do this. So there's the whole controversial watermelon thing, right? About whether or not you can like tap the watermelon. That has been proven to actually be accurate. The vibrations through a watermelon will tell you if it's ripe. But I feel that it's, a lot of times they tell you like, you want to be able to listen to the sound, but that's not reasonable, because if you don't know what that sound is supposed to be, how can you tell if you're hearing the right sound? So what I like to do, I go for vibrations. If I can feel like that's the reason the thumping like works on a watermelon and on squash and on pumpkins, anything that's large like this where you're trying to like see if it, is heavy for its size. That said, I feel the heavy for its size is the most accurate and the most foolproof. But the reason the thumping works on watermelon and on butternut squash is because more water content. Remember that scene from Jurassic Park when the cup was vibrating when the the dinosaur was approaching? That's the reason, right? Water takes on those vibrations. So if you can kind of feel that vibration through the watermelon or the butternut squash, that is another way to tell if it's ripe. But honestly, I feel like it's more accurate to go by weight. So size doesn't matter. Shape just sort of depends. You want one that's heavy for its size, so weight matters. The other thing that you want is you want a skin. It should be beige. So butternut squash starts off kind of a little bit on the yellow side, and then it gets more tan and kind of khaki as it ripens. And so it should be kind of a brown beige skin, and it should be really taut. It shouldn't be wrinkled. There shouldn't be any kind of like, spoilage areas. You can have like streaks of brownness in it. That's totally fine. But it should be really, really taut. That's really, really important. The other thing that's really important is this. You want the stem. If there is no stem, that can indicate a few things. The butternut squash might be overripe and the stem came off when it was being harvested or when it was being trucked to your store or farmer's market. There could be a lot of reasons, but also this is going to be forward thinking, but like when I tell you how to store butternut squash, it's important to store one that has the stem on it. So having the stem on it means that butternut squash will keep fresher longer. So that's really important. You want a stem that's dark brown, doesn't have any mold around the sides of it. But again, size don't matter, shape doesn't matter too much. As I mentioned earlier, if you have one that's a little thicker with a smaller bulb, that means a smaller seed pocket, which means you get more meat from your butternut squash. But basically you want a nice taut skin. You want it to be beige. Let me just check my notes here. I have a lot to cover, so I just want to make sure I'm covering it all. Give me a second here. I want to make sure I tell you everything that's right. Yeah, that's okay. So that's how you buy a butternut squash. So how do you store a butternut squash? Well, first I should ask you guys if you have any questions about what I said so far. Let me see here if there's been any questions. Vibes do matter. Yes, Mary, vibes definitely do matter. So if you have any questions about that, so that's basically how you buy a butternut squash. By purchasing a good butternut squash means that you're going to get the most out of that squash. So how do you store it? Well, here's the thing. So butternut squash is in season from October to about February, at least here in the United States. And if stored properly, these things will keep for up to 3 months. So when you buy one at home, when you bring it home, you want to make sure that you're buying a good one because you want to be able to keep it around for until you're ready to use it, and you're going to have 3 months in order to use it. Isn't that crazy? 3 months, 3 whole months. So here's how you store it. It likes to be in a dark, cool place. So the pantry is great. The garage is great. You don't want it to get too cold. I think butternut squash doesn't want to go below 50 degrees. Believe that's true, which is why you never want to put butternut squash in the refrigerator. Putting a whole butternut squash in the refrigerator is too cold for the butternut squash, and that will actually cause it to spoil faster, right? Like, what's going on? Like, what does that mean? Like, why is it spoiling faster? Because I'm putting it in the fridge. But honestly, like, just some things don't go in there, and that's one of them. The butternut squash will last longer, keep fresher if you store it in a cool space around your house that is cool, dry, dark. But yeah, the fridge is just way, way too cold. Let me see if I have any questions here. I'm gonna check. Anyone have any questions about that so far? Is that all making sense? I'm actually kind of curious. Is you guys finding this helpful? So one of the things I'm trying to do right now with these live streams is give you a lot of different related information. So like we're doing this recipe that has the butternut squash and brown sugar. I'm gonna talk to you about brown sugar in a second. But I just want to give you everything that you need in order to like make this recipe. So, but also just understand the different things involved, like how to pick and store a butternut squash. So for those of you that are watching, I'll say this again, one of the best ways that you can support a creator like me, that a really easy way just to like help me out, give me a thumbs up on this video. Any of my videos that you watch, just give me a thumbs up. Those thumbs up help me get into the algorithm, help let people know that you're liking it. I mean, if you're liking it, give me a thumbs up. If you're not liking it, that's okay too. You don't have to. But if you're liking it, give me a thumbs up because I like what I do. So, okay, so that's how you store butternut squash. Let me get to my notes here just to make sure we're staying on topic. So I talked to you about how to peel it. I'm going to go over that again for those of you that are just tuning in. So if you want to peel a butternut squash, there's a couple decisions you have to make. The first decision is how you're going to use it. If you're going to be using this squash in anything that's a puree, you don't need to peel it. Roasting this squash will soften the peel enough to make it completely edible, which is just extra fiber. I see we got a comment here. Let me just check here. Yeah, don't store it in the fridge. It's just too cold for the butternut squash. And so basically what happens is, because it's too cold, the butternut squash will just ripen significantly faster and spoil significantly faster. So you can store it up for 3 months if you store it in a cool, dry place. And I'm going to have a full video on YouTube that I'm going to be releasing shortly that really digs into all that detail. But yeah, if you store it in the fridge, it's not going to last as long. Okay, so here's the thing. So with peeling it, you want to cut off the ends, and then you want to pierce all around the skin with a knife, and then microwave it for 3 minutes. This is what I did at the beginning of this video. Microwave it for 3 minutes, and then after you microwave it for 3 minutes, take it out, let it cool, which I did not do. You saw me trying to peel it like a crazy person. Take it out, let it kind of cool. The other benefit of letting it cool is, so what happens when you're microwaving it, and I showed you in the earlier part of the video, you saw those beads of water that were coming up to where I cut through it. So what's happening is the flesh of the butternut squash is steaming. So microwaving it softens the skin. The meat steams from being slightly cooked and helps loosen that skin from the flesh. And then also by letting it fully cool after that, it makes it a lot easier to remove. One, it makes it easier to handle to peel because you just nuked it for like 3 minutes. But secondly, by letting it kind of come down in temperature, more of that skin will detach naturally from the flesh. So that's just how you peel it. Okay, so let me go back to my notes here. Okay, we're gonna get into, let's see how we are on time. We got 3 minutes. We got 3 minutes before I have to like toss the butternut squash cubes. So before I get into the next part, I just want to talk about why you should ask you for a couple things. So if you are a subscriber to me, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can hit that notification button. That's that little bell button. If you hit that notification button on my channel, anytime I release a new video or have a live stream, you'll be notified. And I'm here to like basically just help you cook. I want to show you how to store food, how to buy food. I want to give you hacks to like prevent food waste. For example, I was just talking about how you can eat that butternut squash peel. You can eat that, and 40% of the food that we grow, we throw out. So it's important. So if you hit that notification button, but next week or the next live stream that I'm going to do, we're going to talk about parchment paper. I'm going to go over a couple different parchment paper hacks because there's a good chance around this time of year, you're probably baking, whether it's like savory stuff or cookies or whatever it may be. So I'm going to talk to you about some parchment paper hacks, parchment paper versus wax paper. We're going to also share with you a really fun winter smoothie recipe. So if you like chai, you should definitely tune in for that because it's going to be super tasty. So let me get into the next part, which is going to be, I just realized I forgot to do something. I forgot to put the salt on my recipe. It's sitting there looking at me and I'm like, wait, did I use that? I did not use that. That's okay. So I'll just talk about salt for a second. So it's really important to salt your food like at the beginning of cooking it. So getting salt into your food is a like formula of like time and heat. So basically, if you salt it at the beginning of cooking, you'll use a lot less to get the same amount of flavor if you waited to the end of cooking. So it's always good to do it at the beginning. And I'm gonna stir around the ingredients in a second, so I will salt it then, but that's just a little bit of a tip there on salt. So we're going to talk about brown sugar. We're going to talk about sugar. Since we use brown sugar in this recipe, I just want to talk to you about sugar. So for those of you that don't know how sugar, so we have, different types of sugar. That's light brown sugar. I have dark brown sugar. Those of you that don't know, okay, so sugar cane is where we get the sugar from. So sugar cane is taken, it's then just like pressed down into a juice, and that juice is clarified, and it is then basically cooked down into a syrup. So that's how we're kind of, that's the beginning of sugar making. And basically when it's cooked down into a syrup, I'm just checking my notes here. What you're left with is essentially raw sugar. You've seen that, like sugar in the raw. So you have like essentially left with raw sugar and then molasses. That sugar is covered in that molasses. That's what happens when that syrup starts to crystallize. Now, oh, okay, timer went off. I'm gonna come back to that, but first I'm going to stir this and salt my butternut squash. So give me a moment here. Ooh, it's steaming. Okay, let me get a hot pad. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stir this a little bit just to get everything kind of mixed in. You can see how much it's steamed. Oh, it smells so good. It smells just like buttery butternut squash and melted brown sugar. It's so delicious. So I'm just gonna keep kind of stirring this over here. Okay, stirred it a little bit. I'm gonna put it back in the oven, but first thing I'm gonna do, after I get it all kind of back into an even layer, again, once you stir it, you wanna put it back into an even layer. I'm gonna salt it, which I forgot to do last time, so let me just go ahead and salt it. And I'll just stir that a little bit again. I spilled a little bit there. Okay. And get this back in the oven. Okay. We've got a sip of water, and then we're gonna get back to talking about sugar. Okay. So sugar cane is pressed, that liquid is clarified, it's cooked down into a syrup, it's allowed to crystallize, and then basically what you're left with is raw sugar that's covered in this molasses. Essentially, that is brown sugar, but it's not what you're purchasing in the store. Here's what you're purchasing in the store. That sugar is further refined into what you've known to become granulated white sugar. So it's refined down to that point. And then that granulated white sugar is then remixed with that molasses. So I don't know exactly why they do it that way, but they do it that way. So basically they take this refined white sugar and they mix it back with that molasses. And if you go back earlier in this stream, I showed you what the difference is. Like I showed you like the brown sugar and not white, but light brown sugar differences, the dark and light differences. So we have those two differences there, right? So the thing is, what's the actual difference between light brown sugar and dark brown sugar? It really comes down to how much of that molasses they've mixed back into that sugar. So light brown sugar has less, which is why it's light. So about 3% of light brown sugar is that molasses that's been mixed back in. Dark brown sugar is about 6% of that molasses mixed back in. So as you can imagine, brown sugar, just in general, because it has that molasses, that's why it has that moisture to it compared to granulated white sugar. Brown sugar is kind of wet, right? So the reason it's kind of wet is because it has that molasses that's been mixed back into it. And because of the different percentages, you can kind of interchange them, but it really depends. So it depends on what you're cooking and what you're making. And I forgot to set my timer. I'm going to do that right now so I don't actually overcook the butternut squash. So it depends on what you're making. Basically, in baking, if you're making something with baking soda reacts to acid. So if you ever remember, like in grade school when you made those like really fun volcanoes and it was like baking soda and vinegar and it all erupted and foamed everywhere. So that reaction that baking soda has to acidity is what molasses has in it. Molasses has an acidity to it. And so in baking, baking soda is reacting to the acidity that's in molasses. So if you have a recipe that calls for light brown sugar and you use dark brown sugar, which has more molasses, about double the percentage of molasses, that means the acidity from that molasses is not going to be all used up in the bake. And so that could result in various things. For example, having extra acidity in your dough might mean that it rises more when it's proofing, or when it's baking. It's going to change how that bake happens. So they're not completely interchangeable depending on the situation. I wouldn't recommend it if you have a baking recipe that's calling for one or the other. You should basically use whatever it's asking for, because it's probably, hopefully, I say this, hopefully, it's hopefully been tested for that particular ingredient, and so therefore it's going to all work out. But if you swap the brown sugars, then that will change how much acidity is left over in the final product. Now, in some cases that won't matter, but in some it definitely does. And I see that I got a little bit of motion on the comment section here, so let me just get back to that, check really quick. I am doing home ec. I like the science, Murray. I like the science. And so that's really, really important. So, and the reason that, that happens is, like I said, because of that acidity that's in the molasses. So it just really depends on what that recipe is. But if it's a recipe using, so for example, the difference between baking powder and baking soda. Baking soda is just sodium bicarbonate, right? So it's just sodium bicarbonate. It reacts to an acid. Like as soon as you add it into a batter and add the liquids in, like it's going to start reacting. That's going to happen pretty immediately. But baking powder is a completely different scenario. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to test both. So baking powder and baking soda, they never go bad. Either just brown sugar. I'm going to get to that. But baking powder and baking soda never go bad. They just lose their punch. So if you want to test your baking soda really quick, add a little bit, add like a teaspoon of it to like a teaspoon of vinegar. If it bubbles violently, it's good to go. If you want to test your baking powder, take a little bit of it, add it to some really hot water. If it bubbles violently, it's good to go. So what's the difference between those two? Well, baking powder, it just reacts to acid. But baking soda just reacts to acid. But baking powder, it's a two reaction type deal. So baking powder actually includes baking soda, but it also includes like a acid, which is usually cream of tartar, and then something like cornstarch to kind of keep it all together. And what happens when you use baking powder in a recipe, it doesn't really react until you get it in the stove, because it needs heat and liquid to react. So that baking powder has its own acid to balance it out. So with a baking soda recipe, you're usually adding the acid in order for it to react to it. With baking powder, it's all self-contained. That reaction's all self-contained. So if you're using baking powder in a recipe and that calls for brown sugar, you can probably swap out between light and brown with one thing to consider. Dark brown has more moisture because it has double the molasses in it. So there's going to be more liquid in the final result. So just understand that. But if your recipe calls for baking soda, which is requiring an acid for the reaction, unlike baking powder, I recommend not swapping those out. But those two things, baking soda and baking powder, are indefinitely, they won't spoil. They don't spoil. They don't go bad. They just lose their impact. So you can test them in the ways that I just mentioned. And I have a full video on my channel. Check that out too. Like, you can fully test those out. They'll last for a while. So let's see. Welcome to the channel. Okay, I don't know what that is. So let's talk more about this. Okay, so I've told you the difference between the two. I told you how they're processed. Light brown sugar has about 3% of that molasses. Dark brown sugar has about 6% of that molasses. Sugar also does not. Siri is like trying to like come up here, and I'm trying to ignore Siri. Sorry. Siri thought I was talking to it. So sugar doesn't go bad either. Granulated white sugar, dark brown sugar, neither of those go bad either. So that's just something to consider too. All that really happens with brown sugar is that I see some comments coming through, but they're not. Hold on a second here. Here we go. Okay, sorry. Let me just get to the comments really quick. Okay, yeah, cannot hear. You can't hear me properly. I think everyone else can hear me, so I think you need to turn up your sound. Oh, can others hear me? Okay, someone's saying they can't hear me, but I've been doing this now for about. Oh, we've been live for a little while, so yeah, I think it's others were watching in, so I think the sound is okay. And I have an external mic plugged into my iPhone, so it picks me up even better. So brown sugar doesn't go bad. That's the great thing about it, right? It really does not go bad. But what you want to do once you bring this home, brown sugar or light brown sugar, dark brown sugar or light brown sugar, once you bring it home, once you open it, transfer it to an airtight container because it has moisture, right? That's what that molasses is. That's why it's wetter than granulated sugar. It has moisture. So you want to make sure that you store it in an airtight container, and it'll pretty much last indefinitely. It does not spoil. Now, if you see mold or you see something gets into it or whatever, that's a whole different situation, but it doesn't naturally spoil. It's not like produce. So when you store it, you want to store it in an airtight container in a dark, cool, dry place. Now, you can do a couple things if you do get into that brown sugar, because this always happens. Let me just get to my notes here. I just want to make sure I'm covering everything again. Give me one question here. Okay. So if it does get too firm to scoop out, there's a couple different ways you can handle that. So one thing you can do when you're storing your brown sugar, if you store it with a slice of bread, that slice of bread, the moisture from the bread will actually help keep the sugar soft. So you can do that just as your regular way of storing it. I just put a slice of bread on top of the brown sugar, helps to keep it nice and pliable. If you forget to do that, which I often do, and you need to use brown sugar in a hurry, which I often do, and have not prepared and it's already dried out and firm, which it often is, then what you can do is you can actually take your brown sugar, don't do it in a tin like this because it's not going to work out well for you, but take your brown sugar that you're going to use, scoop it into a microwave safe bowl, take a towel that you dampen and wring out the excess water, put it over the top of the bowl, and then microwave it for 10 seconds at a time. Microwave it for 10 seconds, give it a stir. If it's still not where you need it, put it back in there, microwave it, give it a stir, and just kind of do that in batches until it gets to the point where it's, can move around and some of that moisture has gotten back into it. The main thing you want to avoid is you want to not cook the sugar in your microwave. So don't do that. You don't want to cook the sugar in your microwave. So if you microwave it for too long, it's not going to work out. You're going to definitely want to make sure that you do it in batches. But that works for both light and brown sugar. They just dry out. They have their moisture. So you want to store them in an airtight container in a dark, cool place, and then put a slice of bread in there. That'll help keep it nice and pliable. If it does get too firm to work with, you can break it up in the microwave. Okay. I think that is all of our how-to information that I was going to go over. It is. Okay, so that's everything that I want to talk to how-to-wise. We got a few minutes left on this butternut squash, so give me a second to just kind of check and see where that's at. I saw we got another comment in here. Yes, if you like chai, you should definitely check out the next one. If you like this video, throw me a thumbs up. It really does help me out. But if you like chai, be sure to come to the next live stream. Okay, so let me see. Let me grab a fork. I'm going to check on the butternut squash. See where we are at. Oh yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so let me take this out. That's done. Turn off my stove, which has been this almost slipped on the on the butternut squash that I dropped, like a banana peel, almost went flying there. Turn off the stove, which has been like a bidet of heat behind me. And you can see the final recipe here. You can see all the steam hopefully coming off of that. Just really lovely. See how, let me see if I can show you just how fork tender it is. That was me cooking it about 30 minutes. It's probably too hot to eat, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let me just check out here. See if I got any more comments. Okay. So what we've covered, and I'm going to put so I have some video content on some of the topics that I've covered here. Like I have video content on the difference between dark and light brown sugar. I have video content on how to store brown sugar. I'm going to put those video links into the show notes here. I'll go do that after this. But also the other stuff that I covered here, how to store butternut squash, how to peel butternut squash, how to buy butternut squash. Also, this recipe is also a video that's already out there on my channel. So, like, be on the lookout for that new content. This is the stuff that I already have. I'll put in there. And that's how you make just a really simple caramelized butternut squash. It is so good. It's so easy. It's a great side dish. I hope you'll try it and let me know what you think. Oh, so good. It's so good. Just slightly sweet, a little indulgent. Perfect. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see y'all next time. I really appreciate it. See you next time.